Welcome back, my disciples of the dungeon, to the realms of the esoteric, to the lairs that last beneath the ground, full of monsters and exciting things, full of incredible adventure, just within the catacomb walls. Welcome back to Desks and Dorks. Today we are talking about how to fill your dungeons. A couple things. If you really like what we do here, a like, a share, a comment, a subscribe, especially a share, goes a long way. If you want to help us keep the lights on, links to get physical copies of all of our games and digital copies over at itch.io are in the description. If you really like us and you want to support us, that's the best place to do it. So, back by popular demand, we're talking about how to fill your dungeons. Now, if you've been following our series, you'll know that last time we actually talked about how to create your maps, and the first time we talked about overall dungeon structure and how it should relate to your campaign world. So now let's talk a little bit about how to fill your dungeons. And when it comes to doing your dungeons, there's a couple different categories, but the first one that we really have to start with is creatures and NPCs. Now, when you're filling a dungeon with creatures and NPCs, it can be very important to actually think about what does and does not fit the quote-unquote vibe for your dungeons. Yes, that's right, folks. As the kids these days say, we're going to have to make sure that our dungeon passes the vibe check. Now, in order to pass the vibe check, we need to actually connect the creatures and the NPCs that we put into this dungeon with the backstory and the biome that we began with. So, let's look back at the dungeon that we created in the first video in this series, the castle dungeon, a castle populated by, in our case, deserters and bandits. So, what kind of monsters or NPCs would we think would fit into this area? Now, it probably doesn't fit to have something exotic like a dragon or, I don't know, some sort of giant six-armed Gorgon skeleton, but it would probably make sense to have things like bandits or men armed with equipped or scavenged weapons. And specifically, I say scavenge or makeshift weapons in this slide because I really want to hone in on the fact that these are not trained soldiers, these are desperate individuals who have sort of been able to gather, scavenge, and sort of cobble together their weapons and their armory from whatever they could find from the dead, or from those that they have managed to, let's call it, tactically unalive, shall we? Now, you can have some room for monsters in here. Perhaps it makes sense that some of them have guard creatures or guard monsters, beings that they are able to sort of shackle up and perhaps train in ways that are useful to them. But again, you don't want to have anything super exotic or super exciting, at least in this particular dungeon, unless it is a very compelling story reason for being there. If your players think that they are going into a Game of Thrones style of castle siege against an army of desperate vagabonds, they're going to be very disappointed, or at least very confused, when Rainbow Sparkle Shutterfly, the demon unicorn, bursts forth from the earth and starts spewing lava right out of its unicorn horn. That's a little troublesome and probably something that does not exactly fit the vibe. Now, once you have filled this with monsters, the next thing that you need to think about are traps. But before we do that, I want to talk about something called the "they live here too" principle. I've seen a lot of dungeon designs that lean very heavily into traps and into, shall we say, mechanical defenses, automated defenses, and there's usually one huge problem. These things don't exactly take into effect that the people live there too. While I understand the appeal of a good trap within a dungeon, and I realize that I'm sounding exactly like Fred Jones from Scooby-Doo when I'm talking about the appeal of a good trap, but it's important to realize that when you are staffing a dungeon, a lot of times this is an area that is lived in by the characters that you have put there. I don't know about you guys, but sane people don't trap their own spaces. If I had to wake up every morning and worry about being Temple of Doomed as I walk out of bed, I would actually, I'll be honest, I'd probably actually be dead. I think I would truly, genuinely be crushed already by some boulder. I would have forgotten that I had it. I would trip over the actual tripwire. The giant case full of live alligators would have emerged, and I would be eaten alive already. There are huge problems with this, and when I'm trying to put traps into a dungeon, there are three things I want you to keep in mind. One, they should be limited in scope, i.e. it's not going to destroy everything. If you have a criminal overlord who is trying to protect their vault of treasure, having the entire guild hall flooded with lava is probably not a good idea. Remember, they live there too, and at some point, they may in fact truly want to try to get some of the loot out of that area. Not a great call if everything is swimming in magma. 2, they should be placed in areas of great importance and low traffic. That's super important because, again, the more people that you have walking around a trapped area, you're going to have what we like to call a critical level OSHA violation. Again, I don't think there's workers' comp in a lot of fantasy settings, so again, your fantasy leaders and your monsters and your overlords are probably not going to trap areas where one of their underlings might A, die, and B, trigger the trap before it stops the people they want it to actually stop. 3. It should be able to be disabled by the person controlling it. This is mission critical here, people, because why on God's green earth would I trap something if I don't have the ability to unbooby trap it? I need a bypass password, I need a skeleton key of some kind, something, anything for the love of all that is good and holy that would allow me to bypass my trap. Now, there are exceptions to these rules. For example, it doesn't have to be limited in scope if you're in a Mind Flare Overlord's palace and they have a, giant sentient psionic virus that's going to wipe out everybody. Sometimes they can be placed in areas of great importance, but high traffic. For example, a cruel king might decide to have their servants meander through an entire booby trap because they think it's funny. Actually, we have real historical parallels of that in both Wallachia, ancient Rome, the Holy Roman Empire, several sultanates, several maharajas in India. Historically, it's happened a lot that we have some cruel and capricious rulers that are like, wouldn't it be super funny if I made my butlers, Hunger Games it with the building that they live in? And of course, again, some people are just either nearsighted or not nearsighted, but not physically nearsighted, but you get what I mean. They have the inability to project, or the lack of foresight to project that they will need to disable the trap. So sometimes that will happen too. Again, these are good rules, though, to be kind of hard and fast about. And then after you have established them, then you can sort of break those norms and those tropes in ways that are really exciting for your players. So let's take a look at this. Everybody say hello to Uncle Istvan. Hello, Uncle Istvan. This is one of my favorite pieces of magic art ever. I don't know who this guy is. I don't know what this guy is about, but look at his cold, unfeeling eyes. This is a man that wants death, vengeance, and very little else. Actually, I'm gonna be honest, the more I look at this man, I know he eats Hormel chili right out of the can. Search your feelings. Look at this man. You know it to be true. This man has eaten Hormel chili out of a can, cold. And you know he has. He's done it in his boxers and fuzzy slippers while watching, reruns of Cheers. He looks like a trailer park guy. I'll never be able to unsee this. Moving on. So, let's talk about Istvan's treasure. Istvan, I have now decided for the sake of our dungeon, is the bandit leader. He is an unhinged psychopath who has managed to use the chaos of war to seize control of his own little tiny castle. Yay, Istvan. Good job, Istvan. Now, in addition to this, he has managed to seize a great amount of valuables. And so what has he done? He has buried some of them in a hole outside the castle walls, because he is, admittedly, kind of a crazy person. Now, this is protected by a spear trap made of sharpened human bones, because again, look at this Hormel chili eating villain. And most importantly, though, he has a special bone that he wears around his neck that he can insert into the ground like a dowsing rod that will disable the bone spear trap. So, why are we using Istvan? Because this trap actually satisfies all of the core trap commandments. It's not in a high traffic area. If you are a bandit and you are an outlaw, you're probably not going to leave the safety of your stronghold when you know there's a literal war and both sides want you dead. 2, he leads the bandits, so he doesn't want it to go off and, unalive his men. Now, if 1 or 2 of them get unalived because they're getting greedy and they try to get his stuff, he's okay with that. But he doesn't want to lose the bulk of his fighting force because he leads these bandits, and although he, again, is a Hormel-eating, crazy-looking dude, he still wants to be able to hold his actual lair. So again, doesn't want to murder all of his own guys. Finally, he carries the key with him, in case he decides that he wants to bail, if he wants to bribe someone, if he just realizes that the jig is up and he wants to get out with his loot while the getting is good. All of these things satisfy the core trap commandments. Now, I'm going to pass it back over to Camera Kyle, and I'm going to show you exactly how I would start to fill my dungeon and exactly how we're going to move on from there. Over to you, Camera Kyle.
Hello, and we're back. It's me, it's your boy Camera Kyle. We're back in actually MS Paint because Roll20 is having some technical difficulties, and I want to make sure that I get this content out. So, when we last left off, we realized that these bandits had actually walled off a couple sections right there, there, and there. We did this for a number of different reasons because it's one of the environmental storytelling features that we want to have. We also said that right in this prison, right here, are going to be where they find a couple living people, and we said that right here is where the bandits sleep. This is, again, the adapt-a-map method, which is where you take an existing map and you make some changes for your own little copy. So, now, again, we want to talk a little bit about some of the things that we could potentially find. I want to do 4 things. I want to get 2 different enemy types. I want to get a boss type, and I want to get a secret enemy type that we can throw in there as well. We've established that Uncle Istvan is the leader of these bandits, and so I am going to put old Isty right here with this red X. We will say this is his room. Looks like there's some stairs going up there. It makes sense that he would grab the top level. It's the most secure. So, boom, boss character, done. Now, next thing I want to do is I want to have a couple other characters. It seems possible, or plausible at the very least, that Istvan, despite being as paranoid as possible, has some guards. There's probably going to be one that is stationed here, and one that is stationed right here. There we go. Now, when the bandits aren't sleeping, they're probably out along patrol. So we are going to say, and like for me, I like to say basically just a number if something is going on patrol. I don't want to give them set rooms, but I want to give them routes. We'll say that 2 bandits are doing this, and we'll say that 2 bandits usually patrol this way. Excellent. Very good. Now, we have a boss. We have 1 type of enemy, or 2 types of enemies, right? Boom, bandit group 1, bandit group 2. Now, if you wanted to go extra prep, for example, let's do 2 with a circle, and then 2 right there. You can actually make your own map key. Perhaps that this group right here has crossbows and spears. Perhaps this group has short swords and clubs. Doesn't really particularly matter, but you want the guards. Maybe the guards are a little bit more heavily armored. If you've got statistics or like monster stat blocks, if you're playing a game like that, you know, I would have those actually sort of bookmarked, bookmarked either literally or figuratively. That would be pretty cool. Now, we talked about a second monster in the dungeon. I think what better thing could we have but a sort of holy guardian right here in the chapel. We can say that this is a low-level construct of some kind, probably disguised as the statue of a saint or a religious figure. And again, it's part of the reason that the bandits decided to wall off this particular area. Again, environmental storytelling. Maybe, and if we want to do something really cool, I like doing this too. I like doing what I call connections between monsters. So, for example, there's a connection between Istvan and his guards, right? They are not going to like rotate around or patrol. But we can do a connection here between this guy and our peasant that is still alive in the prison. Again, super good. Then one last thing that I want to do, and I'm actually just going to zoom in for myself and for my own use. I am going to say right here, let's just do text because it makes it easier. Right, going to make it white so it shows up. And then, of course, we're just going to make the font slower. But trap outside holds Istvan's treasure. And then depending on the type of system that you are utilizing, what I would recommend is if you've got this already done, I would recommend actually having, like, I don't know, a DC check. For example, if you're playing Dungeons & Dragons, maybe you want this to be Insight. If you're playing something like Vaesen or Call of Cthulhu, you could have an investigation roll. If you're playing something very simple like the D6 or the simple fantasy role-playing game system, you can have those checks sort of done. But, like, I would maybe write 1 or 2, maybe 3 bullet points for what Istvan's treasure is, how you can get access to it, and the ways that the players can actually access that treasure later on down the adventure. Again, this is really simple. This is all of the prep that I do, if I'm going to even do this much. But again, this is a really simple way to make this sort of work. Again, I know it seems low prep, but again, the best adventures are low prep. I realize I'm like stumbling over my words. It is so late at the time that I'm recording this, but hopefully you guys found this enjoyable. And I'm going to pass it back to Narration Kyle. He's going to talk about what we're talking about next video. And we're back. We talked a little bit at length about monsters, traps, and NPCs. Again, this is a minimal, low prep video, but next time we're going to be talking about how to add loot and variant rules to each of your dungeons, and I'm going to be using a number of different role-playing game systems to illustrate what I mean by variant rules. In any case, thank you all so much yet again for coming and watching the video. I really do appreciate it. If you like what we do here, again, a like, a share, a comment, a subscribe goes a long way. If you really want to help us out, you can get the games in the description below. But until next time, I am Kyle Ott for Desks and Dorks. You have all been awesome, and I'll see you next time. Peace.